Earlier on this month at the Game Awards show held by Jeff Keighley, the award show that everybody watches even though it's extremely flawed and has so many different problems, but hey, say what you will, it gets all of the stars to come out, and Jeff Keighley certainly loves giving them a lot of attention, even if that means that the actual awards are limited to like 30 seconds and then you have the notices saying hurry the heck up. Yeah, that ended up being pretty controversial. But Baldur's Gate 3 took home the major award. They took home Game of the Year. This is a bit of a surprise. When we entered into 2023, nobody was talking about Baldur's Gate 3 getting this honor. It was really, is Starfield going to finally recapture the magic for Bethesda, or are they going to lose out to Zelda? Turns out Zelda actually just lost to Baldur's Gate 3, and the thing is, it's very interesting because back in 2015, something similar happened in some regards to Bethesda with another RPG that came out of the middle of nowhere, which kind of did something very different. It was over-delivering for players in terms of content and high-quality content at that. That was The Witcher 3 coming from CD Projekt Red. It was the game that put them on the map, and here we are in 2023, a similar thing happened. The only difference is that we're seeing a lot more comparisons of Baldur's Gate 3 versus Starfield because of the fact that they launched so close to each other. And that's why there's a lot of concern with the future of Bethesda, but the comparisons being made to Baldur's Gate 3 are not limited to just Starfield. It really is the entire cast of major releases here in 2023. Cyberpunk 2077, a lot of people have been making mention of that to Baldur's Gate in recent weeks. We've also seen that with Spider-Man 2, and I wanted to talk about how did Baldur's Gate 3 overshadow the entire lineup of 2023, because it's quite clear that expectations, at least in the RPG genre, have changed drastically, maybe even the entire single-player genre. But before we proceed forward, this video is brought to you by Payday 3. Its first major DLC, Syntax Error, is here, a tale of revenge. After enjoying the fruits of their labor, our gang is brought back into the life of crime as their bank accounts were drained by a mysterious faction. Heading to New York City, they set out on uncovering the conspiracy against them, which leads to them needing to track down and steal combat data for a cutting-edge drone system that is worth a fortune. Along with this heist and story mode scene, Syntax Error brings some new weapons, masks, suits, challenges, and more. Check out all of this new content by clicking the link down the description below. So it really begins with this tweet. It's some random thoughts, but they put perfectly into perspective the issue with a lot of the releases here in 2023 and how Baldur's Gate 3 has overshadowed really all of the competition the last couple of months. This person says, it's kind of genuinely insane to me that Bethesda they released their highly anticipated game Starfield months ago, and I've never seen a single piece of fan content for it, no fan art, no memes, no discussions about companions. I saw more about Fallout 76 when it launched, like what? And then they add that their social medias or their social media accounts are full of people thirsting over Baldur's Gate 3 characters, but none for Starfield. This has 72,000 likes, almost 4.3 million impressions. This just happened just a couple of days ago. And the problem specifically for Starfield is that it doesn't have a unique identity. When you think about space exploration, you're probably going to think about No Man's Sky or the many other space games. Space sci-fi RPG, that's going to go to Mass Effect. An actual Bethesda RPG, Fallout of the Elder Scrolls. And then when you get to the meaty, gritty part of Starfield, the actual content within it, the companions, the factions, there's nothing that really stands out. And that is a problem. And that contributes to why there is such an underwhelming feeling with this game. And there is a difference between reviewers, game reviewers, and user reviews, as we can see on Steam, and also as we saw recently by Bethesda's very hostile reaction, especially coming from a design director. We talked about that in a recent video. Check it out if you missed it. But the thing is, specifically with Starfield, it's the fact that all of its flaws are being compared to Baldur's Gate 3 because that is the new standard within this industry. A couple of months ago, we also talked about this, in which a lot of game developers pushed back on that idea. So many developers in this industry, but we're only a couple of months later. So many different games are being compared to Baldur's Gate 3. It's quite clear that is the new standard, not just for this RPG genre, but really for single-player games in general. But specifically, we'll start with Starfield and work our way to some other games. But this is what I mean. We had this gaming Bible article. I think it's actually a review for Baldur's Gate 3. So good I kind of want to throw up just thinking about it. And they make a big mention about Starfield. They say after playing several hours of Starfield, it was refreshing to play an RPG in which I was never taken out of the moment by a quest give that looked like a piece of cardboard with a rough approximation of a human face scribbled on it. Ouch. I'm certainly not the kind of person who believes graphics are everything, and I actually do like Starfield before anyone comes at me, but Baldur's Gate 3's motion captured performances make an incalculable difference to the overall experience. And say what you will, but how Bethesda has not evolved their facial animations too much, those wooden interactions that you have, yes, they are going to be compared to the beautiful cinematic interactions that feel just so detailed. There's actual motion within them within, say, Baldur's Gate 3. It's going to be compared, and that is what has happened. And yeah, people obviously are kind of taken back by the fact that Starfield just has not improved enough on Bethesda's formula the last number of years. We had this PC Gamer article saying Baldur's Gate 3 has ruined Starfield for me. Bethesda's latest can't help but feel shallow by comparison. The Gamer writes, Baldur's Gate 3 ruined Starfield for me. Stopping my Baldur's Gate 3 playthrough halfway to play Starfield highlighted the stark differences between the two RPGs. Another one coming from the Gamer saying the problem with other games is they aren't Baldur's Gate 3. So another article saying BG3 is setting new standards for game updates. Another thing, look, the game updates, and Starfield should take note, and I think Starfield has as of late with their recent updates on the fact that you're going to be able to travel differently somehow, some way, and I guess sometime in early 2023 in Starfield. Maybe that'll be less loading screens, maybe vehicles finally on maps, although previously they had said that there was technical difficulties with making that happen. Which, say what you want, but Bethesda and vehicles has never been a very good combination. And then we have this article coming from Polygon. It's a different take. It says 2023 isn't a blueprint for the future of RPGs, but it might be an omen. Starfield and Baldur's Gate 3 highlight the changing taste of the role-playing fan base. And I would disagree with this thesis. It goes on to make a point about how Larian, they've been working up to this point for the last 20 or so years, and then Bethesda, well, they're Bethesda. They have a unique style of game that I personally feel is outdated in many respects, especially from a technology point of view. Now, specifically with Larian, I would make mention the fact that what they did with Baldur's Gate 3 wasn't necessarily something that was revolutionary for this industry. It was delivering on something that was kind of the standard about 10 or so years ago, when there wasn't updates and stuff that these developers, these publishers could rely on. And yes, I put a lot of this blame on publishers as they push out these games incomplete and they aren't ready. Now, with Baldur's Gate 3 specifically, what it does is that it provides immense choice, tons of freedom, tons of content, endless choices, past a lot of stuff that you'd expect to see in a modern RPG, but for some reason we don't. And with Bethesda, there's just so many mistakes, so many things that they have to improve on. And I'm not saying that they need to provide 175 hours of cutscenes, but I do think that there are many lessons that they can learn from what Larian achieved with Baldur's Gate 3, especially in terms of the choice, especially in terms of the technology that they have made, or the advancements that they have made with their engine. Bethesda, their creation engine, I don't know if that is the answer for the future. I don't know if they go to Unreal Engine. I don't think that that is the answer, but I don't know. I just know that when I look at those wooden faces in Starfield, it just reminds me that it feels like I've been playing the same game for the last 10 or so years. And that is a problem, and I do not want to have that same feeling with the Elder Scrolls 6. Now, I do want to continue on because we have this recent interview with Todd Howard in which he talks about scale and complexity with games, but he also kind of talks about a topic that was hit on with Baldur's Gate 3 recently. He doesn't specifically mention the name of the game, but it was a discussion heavily about Baldur's Gate 3 in terms of size, scale, all of that stuff, because a lot of game developers have had some very bold opinions about that as of late. And Todd finally kind of jumped in a little bit on this.
So let's talk about the audience. When it comes to the RPG genre, have players' expectations been changing? Has what matters been changing?
Well, I think dramatically, because I think the genre itself has blended into everything. I can't look at a game that doesn't have XP now and leveling up and pick any game you want.
Yeah, he starts off this discussion by talking about a lot of games are RPG light nowadays, and it's true, it is. But we'll continue forward.
Let's talk a little bit about complexity and scope and just the size of games in general. I know there have been a lot of conversations in the press recently about how big should games be? Are we going too big? Should we be smaller? Whether or not that's right, who's driving it? Are we, the developers, actually driving this this need for more complexity? Is it players? Is it reviewers? Where do you think this is coming from?
Well, I think it starts with the developers. I mean, it has to, right?
Yeah, true. We do,
and I think it starts with technology. You're seeing new hardware. You're wanting to use it in new ways. You're looking at demos like, oh, we could do this, we could present it in this way. The scale of games, I think, is I'd have to go back and look, Ted, to be honest. Like, okay, how big were things before? The one thing I have noticed is because more games are played for a long time, they're live, that the ability to update them over time creates games that people are playing right now that have been around for a long time. They've gotten years and years and years of updates, and that creates an expectation when I'm going into something new. How does this compare with a mature game that I've been playing for a while? Starfield, look, its scale is just, I've used the word irresponsible. It's so big.
The problem with that is it's not really that big. I think a lot of the content is just spread about, and obviously it relies heavily on that procedural generation. And for a lot of people, that just there's a big difference between handcrafted content and procedural generated stuff. That randomized stuff in Fallout 4 was some of the most hated content, and in Starfield, I mean, it's everywhere. A lot of the planets are full of it, and it gets boring after a while. But I guess that it ultimately comes down to player taste.
Some of that's intentional, some of it's just us. We made a lot of stuff. But it is outer space, so we were in the position of always trying to put more in and always trying to fill it.
And yes, I should mention the fact that Starfield specifically does have a lot of content within it, handcrafted content, but it's spread about. And the fact that you can interact with so much just in Fallout 4's world or Skyrim, you can just walk about and come upon a different quest or some unique interaction. Well, in Starfield's case, you could walk endlessly for miles and not come upon anything. And that kind of is the problem with Starfield's design, and why a lot of people feel like it would have been a lot better if they just had maybe made one solar system with all of that content within those planets and such. It would have been more concise, and you would have probably felt Bethesda's world building, it would have worked better, but obviously Bethesda wanted to go bigger.
So Starfield, I would say, was the most intentional going into it. This is a game people are going to play for a long time. How do we build it such that it is allowing that in a way that feels natural? And if people have played the game, and if you finish the main quest, et cetera, you can see that. But it's also one where, okay, what does Starfield look like in 3 months? What does it look like in 6 months? What's it like in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years?
And ultimately, I feel like that approach may have been a mistake on Bethesda's part, as they were thinking too far into the future instead of thinking about, that day one, making sure everything works together, it's cohesive. And the fact that all of the mechanics that are within Starfield, it just doesn't feel like it's enough to make somebody feel that true space exploration experience, especially when you compare it to the likes of, say, No Man's Sky, in terms of what Hello Games does with that and the tools at your disposal, especially with vehicles on maps, being able to travel about and also being able to fly your spaceship into the orbit. There's just a lot more abilities within those. And yes, they are going to be compared to Starfield. I get it that No Man's Sky isn't a RPG, but it does share a lot of mechanics. Maybe this is just a me thing, but I do find it a little odd that when you're having a discussion about scale and scope, nothing really revolves around the RPG side in terms of interactions, in terms of characters. It seems to be about creating a vast sandbox rather than talking about, keeping to what Bethesda's strength has been in the past. And that's making rich worlds, rich factions, rich interactions and such. But this one seems to just be concentrating on the fact that they're trying to give players tools to make, these just grand options to explore and such. And I feel like, again, that was a mistake on Bethesda's part. Again, especially, they couldn't have known this, but with Baldur's Gate 3 right around the time it launched, now it's being compared because that game is rich with so much different paths that you can take, so many different characters, so much different choice, so much different freedom, and it's very different than Starfield, in which Starfield's freedom is really just in terms of you can explore all kinds of different planets, Although the problem with that is that you're not really going to be getting too many unique interactions. You're going to be getting a lot of repetitiveness because of the reliance on procedural generation for a lot of that. Now, we also have another interview. This is a former Bethesda developer that worked on Skyrim. He, again, actually specifically talked about Baldur's Gate 3 and some of the differences between Starfield and Baldur's Gate 3. He says this.
Probably the thing, other people have commented on this too, but the thing that at Bethesda we could never get ourselves to do, and that is that they poked into all the darkest corners. They've come out and said quite bluntly, we don't care if only 1% of the players will ever see this. Those 1% that do are going to be happy, and they will tell the other 99%, who will then be happy that the option existed.
Yeah, and I find that bizarre because of the fact that in a lot of Bethesda's previous games, whether that be Skyrim, Fallout 4, if you went to YouTube and such, that was kind of the miraculous thing. You would find a cool little quest or a cool little hidden weapon that you probably wouldn't have found out without this YouTuber or somebody bringing light to it. And I feel like that's kind of the magic with a lot of these recent RPGs, at least in my opinion. And I don't know how Bethesda never really cared about the fact that people want unique stuff within their runs. They don't want to do everything all at once. I think that's the key to the success of RPGs, especially in this modern day.
And at Bethesda, the games we were making were so big, we had to take the approach of, well, everybody's got to be able to do this at some point. We can't lock off content that way. And you can see it in our games. We don't. You can get to be the heads of all the guilds. You can be friends with all the companions. You can go to all the places.
That's a mistake. It really is.
Nothing is off limits. But when you play Baldur's Gate 3, you get the impression, rightly so, that this decision I'm about to make will close off parts of the game and open up others.
Yeah. And that is part of Baldur's Gate 3's impact that I personally want to see in more games. And hopefully that we'll see that with the Elder Scrolls, because I don't want to be able to do everything at once. That is kind of the cool thing about making a new build afterwards, being able to do all kinds of different stuff. And again, in a lot of these AAA cinematic RPGs, whether that be from Bethesda, CDPR, BioWare, and so on and so forth, you haven't really seen that the last number of years. Now again, the discussion about Baldur's Gate 3's impact, it's not just with Starfield, it's also with games like Cyberpunk 2077. We saw this within a review coming from PC Invasion. It was a negative review of the recent expansion of Phantom Liberty, saying dark and gritty, but perhaps not as intended. One of the very big criticisms of Cyberpunk 2077 that's been going on for the last couple of years is the fact that there isn't enough choice. There was a whole controversy right around launch when the game was more of an action adventure rather than an RPG, and this review kind of brings that to light, saying that Phantom Liberty just doesn't have a lot of choice within it. And they go about making mention of that with games like Baldur's Gate 3 setting all new highs for RPGs in choice. I think it can be expected that other huge studios step up to the mark. And this was another thing that we also heard earlier on this year, in which a CD Projekt Red lead quest designer said that we're running at fucking walls and we're going to crash in terms of big budget RPGs. And he said everyone actually, after reading this article, an article from PC Gamer, in which they said that the BioWare cinematic style RPG is dead, it just doesn't know it yet. They said that we mostly agree actually with the thesis, at least when it comes to AAA, we're just running at a effing wall. I think we're going to crash on that really soon. Sasko's comments above kicked off a discussion on the technology behind today's big budget games and the expectation players have for them. The wall Sasko referred to is the ballooning complexity and expense of making games like Cyberpunk 2077. And then we also saw that, say what you want, but CD Projekt Red, they are listening. They have been seeing that a lot of the criticisms that people had with it, they realize that there's going to have to be more light. There's going to have to be different paths. They have to go down that road, especially if they want to stick to that RPG side of their company. This IGN's article says Cyberpunk 2 may have grander branching storylines based on players starting life paths. A CD Projekt Red developer saying, I do think there are things with, for example, with the life paths, which if you don't remember, there's I think 3 of them within Cyberpunk 2077. They last like about 15 to 20 minutes each, and then you kind of all get put on the same path. So it was an illusion pretty much. That kind of gives you the life paths promise of being able to play more different kinds of characters. No, I think this is the thing where in the future, that's an example of something we would like to improve, since I do think we gave a promise there that maybe in the end, we did not really sell. And say what you want, but a game like Baldur's Gate 3 influences that, especially when people are going to be making, well, they have been making those comparisons, saying, hey, Baldur's Gate 3 has all these different characters, they did these different paths that you can go down, but Cyberpunk 2077, it was a game that originally was supposed to be a giant RPG with so many different paths, and it didn't deliver on that. In many regards, Baldur's Gate 3 is what people expected out of Cyberpunk 2077, at least in some regards, especially in terms of single-player content. Now, we also had this specific article. This is about scale and size. Again, this one was about Spider-Man 2, and this was before launch, and they actually weighed in on this debate. As Eurogamer writes, when it first came to light that Spider-Man 2's main story could be wrapped up in a relatively short amount of time, especially when compared to the likes of this year's Baldur's Gate 3, again, that comparison, which can take players literal days to complete, some felt that Insomniac was asking too high a price for its sequel. And the developer said, for us, it really comes down to the experience we want to deliver with the quality we want to hit. Obviously, there's a certain level of, hey, someone's going to spend this much money on a game, so we want to give them the experience that's worth it. The developer goes on to say that no matter how long Insomniac's games it is the developer's job to make sure that it's worth the money, it's worth that investment. So, like I said, the comparisons, the discussions have been going endlessly in regards to Baldur's Gate 3 and its impact on this video game industry, and the comparisons have been made to the likes of Cyberpunk 2077, Phantom Liberty, Spider-Man 2, and Starfield. That has been the big comparison. And these discussions, these comparisons will only continue into the future for right reason. I don't think that Baldur's Gate 3 has ruined, say, those experiences, but I do think that it has hopefully made those developers more mindful about player expectations, what players want from single-player experiences and RPGs. And no, I don't think the takeaway is that everybody wants 175 hours worth of cutscenes. I think a lot of people want quality content. They want immense choice, especially within the RPG genre, and they also want games that respect their time and money. When you have a game that's coming out for $70, and yes, it only has a 20-hour campaign, it is going to be compared to the giant RPG, which is being sold for the same price. Whether you agree with that comparison or not, that is the discussion that has happened, and it will happen. And it's not just Spider-Man 2 that is 20 hours and such, and people make those comparisons. Last of Us 2, I think, was right around that same too. It really comes down to what you value with entertainment. Some people wait a number of months later to play these games for good reason, because they don't feel like it's worth $70. And that is a choice that everybody has the right to. But hey, Baldur's Gate 3 has made its impact on this video game industry, and I do think that it is going to lead to better experiences, especially because Larian has led by an example, and I hope that is something that they will continue into the future with whatever else is planned beyond Baldur's Gate 3. Just a number of months ago, it was accidentally leaked from the Microsoft Activision Blizzard FTC trial that, well, Microsoft completely misjudged Baldur's Gate 3 like many others. It was revealed that Xbox had dubbed Larian's hit a second-run Stadia PC RPG, and here we are now at the end of 2023, Larian holding tons of hardware, and they have had huge sales success for Baldur's Gate 3, and they're also ultimately a household name now in this video game industry, leading by example. Doesn't get much better than that. Anyway, what do you make of Baldur's Gate 3's impact on the video game industry here in 2023? Do you think that it hurt games like Starfield and Phantom Liberty and Spider-Man 2? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, but thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this video or if you found any informative value, and consider subscribing for more videos like this, and I'll see you later.